Welcome back, everyone, to episode 3 of Red Dot Comics Den. So we're very, very happy to have our two guests with us here today. So this is Ryan, this is Aydeel, and I'm VNC, your host, and I'm here with Linging, my co-host. And today we're going to talk about, as you can guys already tell, a topic that's very near and dear to many of us, right? So before we really sort of start off, why don't you guys kind of talk about like your work and introduce yourselves a little bit?
Okay, so Ryan, I've been doing comics. I started off as a script doctor for comics back in 2005, and then got into making my own stuff about 5 years later. Generally, while I do like doing comics in all genres, superheroes are what speaks to me the most. Largely because some of my first exposure to comics was Spider-Man. Even back then, Archie comics used to have regular superhero titles and stuff. And there was like sci-fi themes like, Archie could time travel and all that. So that kind of always stuck in my head, right? And I've always just believed that superhero content is a gateway to a better world. Like, I think it makes people want to be the best version of themselves. So it's always been about just doing superheroes. And while I do enjoy reading your dark, gritty tales, the fellas clad in red and blue and yellow flying through the sky is kind of my favorite types. Yeah. So
it's
campy, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so campy, bright superhero tales are generally my forte.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. I think when we were thinking about doing the podcast, it was like Ryan is the superhero writer guy in Singapore. It's like thinking about superhero comics, everyone's like Crimson Star, Ryan. And we're like, oh, okay. So very honored to have you here with us today.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here also. It's finding great to actually meet people.
Yeah. Aydeel, why don't you talk about like your own work and introduce yourself?
Anyway, hi guys, I'm Aydeel. So I'm the author for Sacred Guardians, published by Asia Pac Books. So basically, Sacred Guardians is it's not a spin-off. It's like the origin story for the project that we've been doing for some time now. And why did it become a comic book, I guess? I guess when we were pushing the project, we wanted the heroes that I wanted to introduce to have an origin story, so people, when the heroes come out, they understand who these heroes are, and that's how I wrote the treatment for the script. I wanted it to be a comic book, but I didn't know whether it could become a comic book up until I met Linging, so.
Yeah.
With her encouragement and everything, I realized that it could be done. So here and here it is, So that's how I became a comic book author, writer.
Yeah.
As to why superheroes, Ryan, I agree with a lot of things that Ryan said. I think growing up, in the 80s especially, I think the most obvious superhero that we were being fed back then was the 70s Superman. Reading all these superhero books even shaped my ideals as a kid and as a teenager. Like standing up against bullies, helping other people, other kids. Teaching you how to be nice, how to be human to others.
Yeah.
Because some kids just weren't. We all grew up. In school, we've seen our fair share of non-desirable characters and stuff like that, But like I say, how it shaped me, because you have to be like honest, blah, etc., with your friends and everything, sincere and stuff like that. So these values have stuck with me, even as I grew up. So I think it kind of shaped me into who I am today, and that's why we have Sacred Guardians as well.
Is that why, like, you think maybe also for you, Ryan, and you, Aydeel, like, this is partially why, like, you think superhero comics really like appeals to people, it stays with us for so long? Because superhero comics has such like a long history, and like we've talked about it, I think like before we started, like it began in 1938, right? And since then, like it's never, like it has its ups and downs, but we are really like near, like at a height with superhero comics. Why do you think, like I know Aydeel has sort of mentioned like some reasons why it really appeals to him, so like why do you also think like it could appeal to you and maybe to like others, and why it stays for so long?
So with superheroes, I think what we're really looking at is, this is a cliche, but it's modern myth. Right?
Yeah.
Some characters are a bit more obvious than others. Like you've got Apollo, who's a more literal sun god version of Superman and so on and so forth, right? And I think that's kind of what kind of creates a staying power,
Yeah.
where these are larger than life characters that still somehow we can relate to, that we can get lessons from. So some of my favorite superheroes are actually, I guess, slightly older than the term superhero, which is usually a result of Superman, right? But you've got characters like the Phantom and Zorro, all your proto-Batman characters,
Yes.
who more so than Batman lived up to the Robin Hood thing, where they were more about protecting the everyman from the big guy. And that's kind of what made Superman so awesome in the original Action Comics, or even in the Grant Morrison runs, where you've got this guy who's essentially a demigod,
Yeah.
and he's still beating up like corrupt politicians or wife beaters and stuff like this, because no problem is too small for him, you know. And then even during the Death of Superman arc, when he's fighting this indestructible killing machine, Doomsday, you got flashbacks with people like John Henry Irons, who talks about how he saved him and stuff. And I think that's something that people kind of either want to aspire to be, or people are kind of hoping to find themselves. Everybody wants their Superman,
Yeah.
you know, and those who no longer need to be looking for Superman, kind of hoping to be Superman, I guess. You know, I've always liked that uncompromised goodness about these characters. Sometimes it can be considered unrealistic, but we're talking about a guy who can fly and shoot fire from his eyes, so I think unrealistic is fine.
I don't think we're going into these comics looking for realism.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
way
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
it's presented. I think that it's these things that
yeah.
draws us to the comics, right?
Like I think it's a understandable desire when people are like, oh, I like Spider-Man more because he's a relatable character. He's a broke teenager. Who hasn't been a broke teenager? But ultimately, while I do like that kind of aspect of the comics, the idea of reading a comic has more to do with, entertainment and to a certain amount, analogy. You know, like when the X-Men came about, they highlighted many problems of society. That's kind of what Marvel does, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I grew up a DC guy, but I've always appreciated this aspect of Marvel more than DC's, because they really highlighted situations and put them in a very consumable way, right?
That's a very interesting point, because you said that they highlight problems in society, and I feel that's why the modern myth is so important. Because like, say Apollo, the Roman god, he doesn't have relatable situations when we think about our daily lives, right?
Yeah.
But for superheroes, they're living the same lives that we do. Yeah, same kind of society.
That's always something I've always enjoyed about it. Like, it's also if you have to look at a lot of like modern, like older myth, right? The characters do tend to get more humanized along the way. Like when the Romans took over the entire Greek pantheon, a lot of them became very warrior. Like Athena went from being goddess of wisdom to being Minerva, goddess of war, because that is something that the Romans very regularly partook in, right? They were basically warring all the time.
Yeah.
So even in that perspective, and you see how the gods evolved in men, I think what we're looking at in superheroes today is the most recent evolution of this.
Yeah.
I
mean, like superhero comics in America, they started around the war period, right? And it was kind of
like the World War II.
like that was the era where like comics were given out to soldiers as kind of like encouragement, and like kids were given it was a bit like propaganda at that time, I guess, but it was just to like kind of get morale up.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
That's really going far back into history though.
but
Sorry.
it's sadly cyclical. So
No, I mean propaganda back then were always in the form of cartoon, right? Back in the 40s. I mean, if we trace it all the way back, I mean, most propaganda had always been cartoons since men have learned how to draw political cartoons. It's one of the oldest form of propaganda, actually. If you ask me, comics especially.
Yeah.
Like you said, in the 40s, you have Captain America and everything. But you see, comics is what we call appealing propaganda back then.
That's right.
Because we don't have the internet, so it was more easier to control media and consumption of information. Right. So comics were always related to certain issues that were the affairs of the time.
Yes.
There were
Very
issues
current.
about a lot of things, very current affairs. So we get a lot of stories, developments that reflected the current affairs of the time. So these were in effect in effect, right, very much propaganda, but it's not in your face, right? It's entertaining, it's colorful. You know, when soldiers or when you want people to agree with you, you know, this character actually encourages you to lean towards that thinking. So yeah, but the evolution of comics, I mean, has shifted from propaganda to purely values entertainment now, because people are smarter, I guess. You know, because now we live in the age of information, you know.
Yeah, and I
So-
think
so
nobody
it's-
wants to be
yeah.
force-fed.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I
like
think
a
they can
social
tell.
messaging.
They're a lot more aware of when that happens.
So you can see how stories evolve, you know, especially when you read comics from the 30s, 40s, all the way up. I mean, for me, it was blatantly propaganda, right? In the old
The
days.
earlier
Like, okay, I know what this
iterations.
writer wants me to, you know, to sing about the situation at that time, you know, and stuff like that. And then I explored comics from other countries as well, no, instead of the US. So of course, and then we have the Japanese comics, the comics by the Kuomintang, you know, all those things. So it's very interesting to see, you know, when you understand what this media is all about, you know, and how it has the ability to reach out to the masses.
Yeah, that's right. The fact that it's popular has given it a lot of power.
Yeah.
Indeed,
So
indeed, yeah.
the choice to work on, like, say, superhero comics for you guys, I think that's like, you know, it's different from choosing to do your own indie or, like, you know, say, autobiographical story, right? Superhero comics is like you made that choice deliberately, which I think is very interesting. Yeah,
like
get into.
And I think it was very interesting that Aydeel was like mentioning how like there are different like types of like comics like all over the world. Like you have, I think like when we think about superhero comics, you always think about like the bastions of superhero comics, which is like, you know, DC and Marvel. But then like like Aydeel mentioned, there are comics from all these other countries, and then of course then we have to think about like, you know, coming back to Singapore. Why do you think we should create superhero comics like in Singapore? Like, why should we tell these stories, and why is that important to you?
Well, I mean, very honestly, it wasn't a priority for me to create a superhero in Singapore. I just didn't see a reason to not create a superhero in Singapore. So when I first created Crimson Star, Star, it wasn't this guy. It wasn't
You can take a look
this,
at it. I can hold it up. Take a
this,
look
like,
at it.
yeah, it wasn't this character. It
wasn't
wasn't
this-
Fundy.
Yeah,
Greatest Singaporean ever.
it was
Yeah, I'm
it was a
not
dude
about
in
it.
a suit, right? I
Yeah,
mean, it was
so
more about
this
the
is-
guy in the suit.
Yeah, so he's it's the same guy. So this guy is powered by the star pulse, which is on his chest, which he gets from an alien. So this version of Crimson Star is very heavily inspired by, you know, Superman and Green Lantern, especially Hal Jordan, who's one of my favorite characters. But when I first created Crimson Star, it was in 2005, and it was after watching Legend of Zorro. So
Oh,
yeah,
huge Zorro fan,
oh, man,
Ryan.
I don't understand why there's not more Zorro stuff out there.
Yeah, this is the first time I've met like such a big Zorro
Okay.
fan.
Like there's so many reboots now, and you think like they wouldn't be rebooting.
Oh no, I love the old Zorro.
Oh, you want the old Zorro?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first Crimson Star I created was actually, set in 1942. At the start of 1943 actually, because a year after the Japanese occupation began. He's a Chinese dock worker who's, you know, fisherman by day, and by night he battles Japanese soldiers, keeping them away from his village. And while working on that story for like, you know, passively for years, I just got tired of World War II.
Okay.
Just one day I was like, you know what, this like the Singaporean narrative is built around World War II so much because it's one of the very few interesting things that's happened in our history.
Yeah.
It's like a milestone that everyone returns to.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, but that cannot be it. That cannot be the entirety of the Singaporean story. And so I kind of abandoned that Crimson Star, and I finally decided to revisit a character in the 80s because I felt that, I mean, I was born in 88, so I don't remember the 80s obviously, but it's always so interesting that the 90s reflected the 80s so much because urbanization in Singapore happened in like there's this like rapid urbanization that happened between 88 to 93. 87 was when our first MRT opened, for example. And then that's when I was like, yeah, I'm going to do a Crimson Star story, and it's going to be sci-fi because a guy running around with a straw hat and a katana just wasn't going to sell in the 80s. And it's gonna be kind of like a commentary on how Singapore in the 80s kind of thought that we were still, forgive the pun, an island, that we could escape globalization. But the fact of the matter is that's just not possible, right? If you want McDonald's, you have to be open to globalization. So that was kind of the premise of this new Crimson Star, which was that he's a guy who comes from Singapore, which has had no superhero activity for 60 years, even though the rest of the world has. He goes to New York, studies, ends up getting superpowers, and the first thing he does is a very Singaporean thing of coming to Singapore and pretending that nothing happened. He just doesn't want powers. He wants a quiet life, and that's what we like, right? We like that we don't have natural disasters and all of that stuff. But that was kind of the idea. The fact is that, like it or not, if you want to be a part of the world is going to come to you.
Yeah.
Right? So that was when I decided that I want to tell a Singaporean superhero story. But why it was so Singaporean was simply because I was like, why should I set it somewhere else? I've never been to New York. I've never been to the US. Trying to set a story there would be a challenge because I don't really understand it visually beyond movies, right? And the idea that I wanted to kind of like really bring forth was honestly that Singapore couldn't just have superheroes, but Singapore had talents as well. So why Crimson Star became a Singaporean superhero was because I wanted an all Singaporean team on it. So and that's when the real challenge started, finding Singaporean talents, penciler, colorist, inker, and then printing it in Singapore, which was the bigger challenge.
Right.
Financially especially.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So it's quite so you're talking about it as like the journey started with the story.
Yeah.
For you had this story and you started writing it out. Is it?
Kind of, but like the original Crimson Star was very much rooted in Singaporean history. The newer Crimson Star is very much rooted in Singaporean, I would say, personality. Right? As I said, he's a guy who just doesn't want action. He likes his quiet life. NS was all the action he ever needed. Yeah. But as to why I felt that there needed to be a Singaporean superhero wasn't so much about a Singaporean being a superhero, but about creating a platform that or an idea that Singaporean artists could draw with some sort of attachment to.
Yep.
So Tasha, who did Crimson Star Book 1, right? Crimson Star Book 1 is almost entirely set in New York because it's his origin. So I went to Tasha with that because it was easy for me to find reference images of New York. But even then, if you look at the very first page of it, which is the airport, I had to emphasize to Tasha there's only one terminal back then. And that was quite interesting because Tasha is 18 years old.
She's never seen that.
Yeah, so the first panel she drew, I was like, no, this is not how Terminal 1
looks like. It's too modern.
Yeah, so there's actually two panels of this that exist. One with the older Terminal 1 and one is this. This is the older one. And the next book, which is actually set in Singapore, I'm looking for an artist who actually lived through the 80s. Right? Because they need to... I just want them to be able to feel like, yes, this is the Singapore I grew up in.
Like the authenticity.
It's kind of like the Marvel thing where we're using real locations as opposed to DC's Metropolis and stuff. Yeah, Marvel's always like in New York.
Yeah.
All of Marvel is in New York apparently.
So okay. I think the interesting thing is that for Aydeel it's like so different, right? It's like you're talking about going back into history, like Singapore history, World War II history. But for Aydeel, it's like, I think when we were thinking about the story for Sacred Guardians, it's like we skip all of that. We decided that the root of, I guess, like the characters that Aydeel was developing, it goes way past that. It's like 700 years ago.
More than 1,000 years ago.
Yeah. It's like before everything,
before everything, yeah.
Like colonialism, before like everything we understand about Singapore.
Yeah, I mean, I like to believe that Singapore's history is longer, spreads beyond 1819.
I agree with that.
Yeah, so that's when I explored the history of the entire region, especially. Because I think the first question regarding the comic, right, is identity, right? Like I said, I want people to understand where the heroes are coming from. So when it comes to identity, I realized that for us to have an attachment to a place, to a country, to a piece of land is to understand what this land means, right? So I think that was the first motivation to explore that region, that's not very much understood even by historians today. There's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of understanding, there's a lot of just just trying to imagine what this island was like back then. So there's like a gap in history which I exploited to have my story in. Makes sense that people can't really say it didn't happen, because they can't say things whether things did happen or not.
Yeah.
But generally we knew what was going on.
Yep.
But on an intimate scale, nobody knows.
Yeah.
Yeah, and on top of that, it gives us an anchor, right? To understand where the characters are from and how we are related to everything that surrounds the origin of the island, the region, and further understanding who we are today. Why we are here and everything lah. So in a sense, it gives us inheritance, right? As Singaporeans, I want a story that gives us a sense of inheritance. Like I'm born here, and this is what I identify with, what this island means to me, and along with it is more than 1,000 years of history. And we are proud to carry on that, that spirit that the people of this island have shown for the past over 1,000 years. And and we will always be looking forward, because regardless of what happens, we will always be here, right? Or people will always be here, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's to inspire lah. And on top of that, to go further, right? I mean, first and foremost, when I explored the tokusatsu genre, I mean the heroes, they're of course different, right? They fight aliens, they fight evil scientists, they fight evil alien scientists, and they fight alien monsters. like they're
Aliens is
dinosaurs.
a common theme.
Yeah, they're dinosaurs, but they are still alien dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Yep. And it is interesting lah. So, but they also focus more on the social background of the era lah back then. So and then on top of that, I also explored superheroes titles, locally, region, and also regionally. And then I noticed, I mean, there's no wrong or right when it comes to ideas and stories, right? It's just how good the stories are.
Yeah, that's right.
But a lot model their characters after Western superheroes, have links to Western style, the costumes and everything. And at the same time, I don't want my heroes to also follow too much of Japanese costume styles.
Yeah.
And their motivations. So I dug deep into the history of our region, our cultures, our customs, and everything. So we have sacred guardians who reflect a lot of this, and even though they are mystical, their mysticism is still rooted in the ancient beliefs of the people here. No matter who we are today, our customs, our cultures all reflect the same beliefs, the same understanding of where these heroes are from. It's related to all of us, regardless of our race, language, or religion, right?
Yeah.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. Sounds very. Sorry,
Yeah.
it sounds very very nationalistic, but no lah.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about Sacred Gardens is that we were developing it around the same time as all the bicentennial like national messaging, right? So in a way that kind of affected I guess the way that we developed the story and the characters. I mean not we, as in more like Aydeel and the artists Alan, Zaki helped out. So it's so interesting, right? Because we have one superhero story that's there's that American influence, you can see it, there's like the tights and all that. And then the other superhero tradition we're looking at is tokusatsu. I mean, tokusatsu is its own thing, it has its own cult audience. We don't normally call it a superhero genre. But yeah, I mean, Aydeel, can you share with us maybe a bit more, as in basically talking about Sacred Guardians, because I think that's a very important backdrop for how the comic book came about.
I mean, the Western writers, I have to admit, a lot of them are very good, and that's why they are leading in this industry, right? I mean, you have the Eternals. They play a lot on ancient mythology as well, but mostly from the Middle East. I mean, all the way to the West. I mean, like Gilgamesh, etc. Babylonian gods, ancient god kings, right? That's the Eternals, right?
Yeah.
And then we have all, like you said, we have Saw, and then DC have of course the Roman version, Mars, everything, blah blah blah, Eros, Greek Roman gods, ancient Nordic gods, all the old gods. right? So that's their culture, right? So when I developed Secret Guardians, I was like, it's not like that. It's not like we are lacking on the same measure, on the same scale. We are not lacking at all. We have a whole long list of culture if we want. We
Yeah.
just want to explore it and understand and realize where we are from and who we are, right?
Yeah.
And these have not been explored nor celebrated by a lot of writers from the region.
Yeah.
I mean, Indonesia they explore a lot of their own cultures, but they do not expand it.
Yeah.
You know,
Indonesia, there's the Bumi.
Yeah, we have like
What's that series? There's the superhero.
Their own franchise.
they have
Actually.
their own
Yeah.
franchise.
Gundala.
What's it
Gundala.
called?
Gundala.
And
Gundala.
then
Okay.
we've seen the trailer for an upcoming movie, Gatot Kaca. Also an ancient god in their from the old beliefs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not really an old belief, because in a sense our cultures still celebrate the remnants of what remains today. So when I draw all on this, right, is to celebrate the culture, the customs, and to bring people together with a common, like I said, a common anchor, which is the old cultures, the old, like they said, the old gods, maybe, there's inferences to a lot of the old deities.
Why don't you talk a bit more about that, like your characters and how you
Yeah.
distilled all these themes that you've been talking about
Okay.
into these characters? I think I'm also very interested to hear from Ryan and how like your character interacts like with the themes and the world that you've also been talking about.
Maybe we
Here-
can talk about focus on one or two characters.
Yeah. Like this, like a standout character, maybe from Sacred Guardians, and then for Crimson Star, I guess it'd be Fandi or like or Starlight perhaps. Yeah, maybe you guys can like talk about the characters.
Secret Guardians, of course, even in the modern story, right? The heroes themselves are not the central character. Central character is, of course, Dave. If you have read the comic
Yes.
book, Dave is he calls himself an Asura because the people call him that from the past, from a past that we do not remember. So he's like an immortal, So in a sense, I decided not to make him alien.
Of
So
this world.
of this world, yeah. He's
Just
of this
blue
world,
hair.
just blue hair, but from another realm of this world.
Yes.
Yes, as a parallel realm, right?
Yes.
But it's
Right.
connected. Yeah, so it plays a lot on the ancient beliefs. So one of the interpretations of Singapore is not that it is land of the city of the lion, right?
Lion
Because when we explore ancient times, right, there were not many cities that were called Pura. No, they were Kota or something else, right? But when a certain place has the connotation Pura to it, it is a holy place. So given that Nila Utama was a prince in exile, for me my inference is that he was seeking the blessing of the divine one.
How did you bring that to your sort of like? I know like Singa is like a main hero in this
So
comic.
I mean that's
how
one
did
of
you
the
bring
interpretations that I got. So with Singa, of course, I use it as a spirit animal instead of linking it to deities and stuff like that. So it was a bit of a creative, creative interpretation. Yeah. So with the spirit animals, I bring them back. They have an origin story of their own. So there was a time, like I said in the story, it was already hinted, right? There was a great war.
Yeah.
Yeah, men and the Azurans and the spirit animals, they all came together to stop a demonic invasion of our world from the other realm. So that's where it all began. So for me that plays a lot on the Mahabharata.
Mahabharata.
Yeah, and the stories within the Mahabharata, right? Like the Bhagavad Gita and everything, where there's a saying, I am the destroyer of worlds, blah blah blah.
Yes.
Yeah, inferences to a massive war on this planet.
I think that's why like Sacred Guardians is kind of like so rich. It's because you have all this like background like
Yes.
like infused into these characters in the world itself. And I think like I also want to hear from Ryan about like your characters as well, like Starlight and Fandi and all these other themes that you've been talking about. So
Okay, so Starlight's actually rather old as characters go.
Oh.
In the sense that she wasn't created for Crimson Star. She's okay, so in this world, basically superheroes appeared in 1928, and they've been around. So by the time Crimson Star Book 1 happens, it's 1988, right? So 60 years, superheroes flying around the world, creating as much disaster as New York can handle. And Singapore has been action-free.
Yeah.
So one of the main, your Justice League, if you will, of this universe was the New Crusaders. And Starlight was created as a member of that team. So when I started working on this newer version of Crimson Star in 2011, because I knew that I didn't want his powers to be from something that happened here in Singapore, that's when I came up with the whole him working in New York. He kind of like builds a
The arm of globalization theme come in,
exactly.
and I can see
it was
that.
important
Yes.
that he went out and then he brought it back in.
Yes.
Right. So I kind of like made him the lowest lane to Starlight's Superman, and that was kind of like what kicked up the whole idea of a first superhero in Singapore. You know, so the idea here was that how would Singaporeans react to finally getting superheroes in Singapore? We are not a people who like change. We like the status quo very much, right? And sometimes we automatically dislike what is new, even if it's good. And to kind of like further add to that, Fundy is very much Singaporean. So he doesn't like superhero action either, which puts him in a position where he doesn't like himself. And as a journalist, he sees himself as a person whose purpose is to bring the truth to people. And here he is living the greatest lie, because he's a superhero and he can't tell people that the biggest thing to happen in Singapore in the last 6 decades is him, because he can't compromise himself.
It's like he's like shy, you know, like paiseh, you know, like
kind
doesn't
of.
want to keep his head down.
It's what I like about Superman, right? Because Superman always says he doesn't tell lies, but the thing is, as Clark Kent, he is telling a massive lie.
That is so true.
He's always telling a lie, basically.
Exactly.
Yes.
Then you've got Spider-Man, who basically managed to take selfies of himself and turn it into a career, right? So with that's always been an interesting thing for me, because like a lot of my early career was journalism. And the idea of telling the truth was such a big deal. And I was like, how do you corroborate this if you have a secret identity? So that kind of like eventually led to this aspect of Fundy, where he's like, I want to tell you the truth, but I really, really can't.
Ryan, is
It's
it
super cool actually that you bring in like the background, like the journalist background specifically to play with like his superhero identity. I don't know if did we ever get that from Superman? Like we always knew he was a reporter, but do you ever sort of play up that like interaction between him like his identity as a journalist and his identity as a superhero? Which I think this is quite new.
I don't think
it's
we
quite
see that
interesting.
explicitly, but he has discussed how, or rather Lois has pointed out how he claims to tell no lies, but he lives a lie. Right? And but that's also why with Superman there's always the eternal debate. Who's like, with Batman it's clear, Bruce Wayne's the mask, Batman's the real person.
Right.
With Superman it's quite divisive. When he was first created, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster made it very clear. Superman's a real person, Clark Kent is his disguise as a
Mask.
mild-mannered reporter. By the time
So
we
it's-
hit the 80s, especially when we hit the Dean Cain era of Superman, that Superman says that he is Clark Kent. Superman is what he can do. So now Superman is a mask, right? Yeah.
So what about Crimson Star and Fundy? Who is the mask? Who is the...
So he definitely identifies Crimson Star as a mask, because he doesn't really like being Crimson Star, right? But at the same time, seeing himself as a person who serves the people, the question then becomes, if Crimson Star does more for the people than a mild-mannered reporter can, then shouldn't he actually be Crimson Star first? Because his ideals start to match the superhero persona. So Fundy is basically living in an existence of hating himself, because he doesn't want to be what he can be, but what can be the best for the people is that thing. Yeah.
Right.
So that's kind of a Fundy thing.
Where do you like see these characters going like in the future? Because you have like there's still a lot more stories to tell for both of you.
Yeah.
So where do you kind of see these characters like moving forward? Like what's in store for them basically?
Well, I guess it comes down to whether the more financial aspect of projects work out. But in terms of storytelling, Crimson Star's actually it's done writing.
Oh, great.
Like I've already written what will be the last issue of Crimson Star, and that was written very many years ago before I even knew that I was going to take this whole thing seriously.
Whoa, how many issues is that? So
At that point, I was planning with 65 issues,
yeah.
Wow.
which now truncates into like 25 books because the whole single issue thing just
Doesn't work in Singapore.
Yeah,
Doesn't make
I-
sense.
honestly, it doesn't work globally. Not
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah,
It
that's
doesn't,
true.
Yeah.
There's
I
no
think
channel for it.
They're having a hard time, right, managing this kind of single issue.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, we had like 2-3 decades of how like exclusivity of marketing comics and distribution through Diamond and stuff.
Yeah.
It really hurt the industry. I don't think we're coming back from that. And honestly, I don't think we should. I think we should focus on telling good stories. And this was kind of prevalent in the 80s, right? Where you had a lot of good self-contained stories. It wasn't always about New 52 and big events that sprawl over 30 titles and stuff, right? So with Crimson Star, I'm kind of hoping to like do that. So I did a Crimson Star issue number 1 purely for the sake of novelty, just so
Yeah.
that I can do an issue number 1 as a geek myself. But after this, it would be generally like 70-page books.
Okay.
Yeah. So the original 65 20-page stories have been kind of like truncated, revised, and a bit expanded into 25 books. And
That's a lot of pages.
that is a lot of pages. Yeah, that is a
Still,
lot of pages.
still a
And
lot
my
of
dream is to
pages.
get a different art team on each book.
Wow.
So like a different Singaporean art team on each book, because hopefully it works as a springboard for like local artists to like, I'll be very happy to tell each of these people goodbye as they go and do Spider-Man and X-Men and stuff, because honestly that's the dream, right? You kind of want to it's not just about telling the world we've got Singaporean content, it's also about telling the world you are reading Singaporean talent, right? Like that's why it's so cool to see like Stanley Lau and Sunny Liu all on like these kind of books, and I'm hoping the next will be like Tasha or Colin Yap,
Or Samara.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I've got almost all of them represented on this table right now, so that to me is probably one of the bigger achievements actually.
Yeah.
It's like a representation of like Singaporean.
Yeah, I mean, when I first did my very first comic in 2010, it was difficult to find local artists because you had Facebook, but communities weren't exactly very easy to come by. And then now it's, just to throw a stone out there and you can find somebody who wants to do a comic, and it's really so cool. Like while doing Hero, I get messages asking like, do I want variant covers and stuff, and that's so cool because at one point of time I would have been struggling to find an artist, and now everyone's putting themselves out there. They're using the platforms, which is greater than having the platforms. Yeah, so it's
I think
it's evolution.
that's the beauty of the superhero tradition as well. I think like it's been a very good base for writers and artists to have an audience that follows the character. Of course, like we talked about this, like Crimson Star has been around for a while. I think the important thing that we wanted to highlight to our viewers today is that it's something like superhero stories and all that tend to be actually led and directed mostly by the writer. Yeah, so in this case, like it's really nice to see that you've worked with so many different artists, because I think they bring like a different look and feel to the story, and I think that's something that we can hope to explore more in the future. Like I'm sure a lot of artists, their dream is to eventually draw for like DC and Marvel, but I mean, why not look locally and like work with writers here, stories here, characters here? I think that's actually like something really exciting.
I think before we wrap up, I think I want to like also hear from Aydeel about like what's in store for Sacred Guardians as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, what do you have planned for the characters, the world?
Yeah.
Actually, I keep wanting you to talk about it, because I mean the Sacred Guardians franchise.
I mean, what can you reveal for us?
What I can reveal is, what we have already revealed to the world, to the public. I mean, Sacred Guardians, of course, split into the separate stories of the characters in our modern time. Right? So, of course, we have Sacred Guardian Singa, Sacred Guardian Elang, now in development in Jakarta.
These are TV shows, right?
These are
Sacred
slated
Guardians,
to be
Singa.
TV series. I mean, we're hoping to. I mean, we came very close with Peter Call last year.
Yeah.
But of course, we're not giving up. We're trying to go beyond being very close.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like a really big opportunity for us to also like remind audiences like, your support really matters.
Yeah.
Like, I think
I think the more support will be very crucial for these kind of projects to actually gain traction locally.
For small creators.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
small
For
creators,
indie
yeah.
creators, it's always been about
And with Sacred Guardians, the comic book itself, I mean, like, it is my first project as a writer for comic book. You know, I work with Alan Bay, I work with Zaki, and these two are very talented artists as well. You know, it made me appreciate the art form more. You know, having worked with them, you know, it's not easy for me to say something, and for them to envision what is in my head. You know,
Yeah.
they can't see what I see, right?
Yeah.
So they only hear what I see. But for them to be able to interpret my words, you know, and come up with something so phenomenal, you know, I take my hats off to them, lah. I mean, I'm convinced that Singapore, we have tons of very talented people who are just waiting to be unearthed,
Mm.
you know, waiting to be discovered, and we should not give up on all of this, right? Be it superheroes or other forms of stories, you know, like what Ryan is doing with Singa Heroes and everything, you know, is very admirable. I love how he's bringing all the artists together, and we should have more initiatives that should do that as well. I know, and with Sacred Guardians, I think there's an opportunity to do that as well. So it's something that we can explore. Yeah, but it will take a bit of time because we need to develop the characters even more fully. You know, like a lot of people are really asking me, you know, for the original characters, they want an extended story for each of the
Yeah.
characters. You know, like Nina.
Yeah, everyone says that it's not long enough.
It's not long enough.
Yeah,
I mean,
you got so many nice, like the character building is
But I
great,
think
but it's not
the
enough.
cool thing about worlds like that is that they're so expansive. So there's a lot of directions that you guys
We
can
can go
really
to, yeah.
explore. And like, I think we had like a really, really comprehensive and like in-depth discussion today.
I got one last question though.
Oh.
The question I want to ask is, will there ever be a Sacred Guardians and Crimson Star Singer Heroes crossover? What do you guys think about that?
I think we did kind of speak.
we met before to discuss certain things. I mean, I'm open to any possibilities because I'm not one to be bound to any kind of
Yeah, I think
what
the
call
good
it
superhero
any
stuff,
boundaries.
Yeah, always like kind of like crosses over.
Multiverse.
I mean, that's
crossover,
yeah,
it's always
because-
cool.
Because we just have to be creative enough to know how
Yeah.
we can cross into each other's universe.
Yeah.
Well, Crimson Star can reality hop, just not within his control. So
I mean, in a
Maybe
sense,
one of these days,
he just has to
suddenly,
bonk his head hard enough and he
yeah,
turns
I
out
mean, in a
somewhere
sense,
else.
I made space for it because Sacred Guardians are not here to fight petty criminals.
Mm.
You know, not politicians and everything. Their purpose is different. You know, it's to protect the realm from other sorts of threats.
Existential
Right?
events.
Existential
Yes.
threats, yeah.
Very cosmic, big
Very
picture.
cosmic, big picture
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So there's space for it. Who's to say? Who's to say the characters can't join forces to fight a petty criminal who partners with a cosmic threat?
Oh,
I mean, if Joker can work with Lex Luthor,
Yeah, precisely. Right.
anything can happen.
Anything can happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
something like something.
And we're really, really glad to have you guys with us today and really
Thank
get that
you,
writers' input
Thank you for
on
having
our
us.
podcast
yeah.
as well. And yeah, that's all for today. So make sure if you guys want more content like this, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. You know, check out hit that notification bell as well to stay updated on when the next episode will come out. And also, if you want, you can follow us on Instagram and join our Discord community. Because it's like popping off right now, honestly. So it's quite happy
both
to hear.
Ryan and Aydeel,
They're also
they're,
on
they're
there,
both on
yeah.
the Discord.
They're also
server.
on there, so you know if you
Yeah.
can ping them if you want to talk to them there as well. So yeah, that's all for today, and we will see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.